This family wasn't gonna wait to hit the jackpot, so they just took someone else's chance. The odds of you winning the lottery are worse than 1 in a million. But those odds change if you steal a winning ticket. For the record, we don't recommend stealing anyone's ticket. But how do they do it? And more importantly, what happened next? Let's find out. Kenneth Chung's Variety Plus store in Ontario was having a quiet day on the 22nd of December, 2003. Behind the counter was Kenneth's dad, Jun-Chul, who was sometimes employed by Kenneth to help out at the store. On that day, it was also Jun-Chul who had the job of checking lottery tickets for customers. On that sleepy day, Daniel Campbell walked into the store. He was a regular and had been to the store just 3 days earlier to buy a stack of 4 Lotto Super 7 tickets. He often bought lottery tickets with a group of friends from work. The 6 of them would all chip in some cash. Then one of the friends would go out and buy the tickets. If any of the tickets won, they'd agreed to split the winnings. It was Daniel's turn to buy the tickets now, while the group waited patiently to hear if they'd won any money just days before Christmas. Daniel politely handed over all of the tickets to Jun-Chul, while Kenneth stood nearby. One by one, Jun-Chul put each ticket into the machine to check for Daniel's lottery winnings. And amazingly, Daniel had won. Okay, so he hadn't won any cash, but he had won 5 free plays. That's a pretty good deal. And Daniel excitedly picked his 5 free tickets on behalf of all his friends. He handed these new free play tickets over to Jun-Chul too. And again, one by one, he checked all 5 tickets. He told Daniel that, unfortunately, it wasn't his lucky day. Not even one of the tickets had won anything. He handed a stack of tickets back to Daniel, who left the shop and went about his day without really thinking about that encounter again. After all, it's not unusual to not win the lottery, is it? Only if Daniel had looked closer, he would have realized that Jun-Chul had only handed back 4 out of his 5 free play tickets. The 5th ticket was still in Jun-Chul's hand. Why had he not given it back to Daniel? Because the machine had told him the ticket was a jackpot winner. And instead of doing the right thing and allowing Daniel and his friends to claim the greatest Christmas gift they'd ever get, Jun-Chul decided he'd keep it for himself. We know, that's a pretty terrible thing to do. So how much had Daniel and his friends won? We'll get to that in a moment. Jun-Chul now had a problem. He was determined to get his hands on this jackpot. But how does he claim the prize without looking suspicious? It looked like it was time to get the whole family involved in this huge crime. Jun-Chul's son, Kenneth, could never claim the lottery prize because he owns the store where the ticket was purchased and checked. It would be way too suspicious for him to go down to the lottery office with the winning ticket. And it would be too suspicious for Jun-Chul to do it himself because he was employed at the store. Luckily, Jun-Chul also had a daughter named Kathleen, and she had nothing to do with her brother's store. It was pretty obvious she should be the one to collect the winnings, and she was more than happy to get involved in the crime in exchange for some of the money. But the family needed to make sure they didn't raise any suspicions. So they waited a few months before sending Kathleen to collect the winnings. Finally, in February the next year, she made her way down to the offices of the Ontario Lottery and Gambling Corporation to collect the stolen prize. They always have a few questions before they hand over a jackpot. And even though she had months to rehearse, Kathleen wasn't answering their questions so effectively. They soon noticed that someone who shares her family name owns a variety store near her home. But she denied having any relation to Kenneth. Then, she eventually backtracked and admitted her brother did own a store. But she said she definitely didn't buy this winning lottery ticket at his store. Instead, she claimed she bought it in Street Catherine's on a whim. Then, when they asked her exactly which store, she said she couldn't remember. In fact, she claimed she couldn't even remember buying it, but still insisted she was the rightful owner of the ticket. I've never heard a more suspicious story in my entire life, and maybe someone at the lottery thought that didn't add up because there was a delay for a few months where the money wasn't handed over. But in the end, against all odds, the lottery shockingly decided to pay out the money to Kathleen. That's not good news for anyone who has their ticket stolen in Canada, but we still don't know how much they handed over. How big was the prize they'd stolen from Daniel and his friends? A whopping $12.5 million. The Chung family were obviously delighted that they got away with their crime, but they were still trying to avoid suspicion. So they got other members of their family involved who were much further away from the local lottery office in Canada. They had an aunt in South Korea, and they figured the millions would be a lot safer if they were hidden in an offshore bank account over there. So they sent most of the money to her bank account in Seoul. As for the rest of it, well, they decided it was time to start spending. Weirdly, even though they were worried enough about looking suspicious that they went to the effort of putting the money in a Korean bank account, they didn't seem worried about how suspicious it would look to start spending crazy amounts of cash. The family soon owned 2 mansions and several luxury cars. For the next 3 years, they lived a life of luxury, becoming less and less ashamed of flaunting their stolen money. The longer they got away with it, the more they lived it up. They had no idea that things were changing behind the scenes. Remember how we said it was pretty shocking that the lottery had paid out the money to them, even though Kathleen was obviously lying about how she got the ticket? Well, it turns out that kind of thing was a pretty big problem in Ontario at the time. There had been so many suspicious lottery wins like this one that the government started to take notice. And it was the government who eventually issued a report in 2007, which accused the Ontario Lottery and Gambling Corporation of ignoring fraudulent claims on lottery tickets. They didn't know if the corporation was doing this deliberately or if the people in charge were just too lazy to follow up on suspicious claims for lottery jackpots. But either way, the government was sick of it. Their report was enough to trigger a massive investigation into lottery claims from the years 1999 to 2006. And that included Kathleen's claim to the jackpot. Now, with all the pressure on them to check up on these claims, the corporation wasn't able to ignore all the obvious signs that Kathleen's ticket was stolen. With all the other cases they needed to investigate, it took them a bit of time to look into Kathleen's case. But in 2010, the Chung family's world came crashing down around them. Jun-Chul, Kenneth, and Kathleen were all arrested and charged with fraud for stealing Daniel's jackpot-winning lottery ticket. It took a few years to secure a conviction for the criminal family. Initially, Kenneth, as the owner of the store, received a 10-month prison sentence, but he was later acquitted of all the charges against him. In the end, the judge just couldn't prove beyond a doubt that Kenneth had been in his store that day, or that he had any idea his father had stolen the ticket from one of his customers. We'll leave it up to you to decide if he was involved or not. But Jun-Chul and Kathleen weren't so lucky. Kathleen was sentenced to 4 years in prison, and Jun-Chul got 7 years. Although you'll be disappointed to hear that they got out on bail pretty soon after. So was there any real justice for Daniel and his friends? We have an answer. But before we tell you, you should know that this isn't a one-off. It actually happens a lot. There are many ways that store clerks steal winning lottery tickets. Some have been caught making strategic scratches in tickets so they can see if they're winners, but still put the losing ones back in the pack without raising too much suspicion. One even scratched off only enough to reveal the serial number so the ticket could be scanned by the machine that checks for winning tickets. Normally, that serial number is revealed only when you correctly scratch off a ticket. One unique idea came from a clerk named Kenya Louise James, who spotted an incredible opportunity with a store she worked at received a shipment of lottery tickets. She guessed there were so many that nobody would notice if she just took a whole box containing 150 tickets for herself. Don't get any ideas though. It's not as easy to steal a shipment of tickets as it sounds. They need to be activated before they work. And to do that, someone needs to actually buy them. Also, the box was worth $300, so the store owner had already reported them missing to the police. So when Kenya tried to scan them to check for winners, they were waiting for her. Although she still had time to complain to the lottery office about the ticket scanner not wanting to check her ticket. Also, she probably shouldn't have used her actual signature when she took the delivery. But not all clerks who steal tickets are as easy to catch as she was. Over in Miami, Sylvia C. Kalia had been stealing tickets for years. She owned La Rampa supermarket, and every time one of her customers came in wanting to check their lottery tickets, she'd take the winning ones for herself, just like Jun-Chul did. Only, Sylvia did a lot. She'd hand the tickets to her husband to cash them in, hoping that it would help her avoid suspicion as the owner of the store. And it actually worked. Over the years, her husband claimed a whopping 11 winning lottery tickets. None of them were winners of $12 million like the Chung family's stolen ticket, but they had stolen a lot of cash from real lottery winners who trusted them with their tickets. In the end, Sylvia and her husband had gathered $36,000 from their stolen tickets, and not one person had noticed. So how do we know about it? Well, as you could tell, clerks stealing lottery tickets is a pretty big problem in the US. So, the lottery corporations have put a pretty interesting thing in place to help them catch thieving clerks and make sure that winning lottery tickets stay in the hands of their rightful owners. This is gonna sound like a story from a TV show, but we promise it's really happening in real life. Up and down the country, undercover lottery agents are setting traps for lottery clerks. How does it work? Well, a lottery agent posing as an ordinary customer visits a store and asks the clerk to check their ticket to see if it's a winner. Only they already know it's a winner. The lottery has deliberately issued them with a winning ticket to catch a thief. Of course, if the clerk tells the agent that the ticket has won, then there's obviously no crime happening. But if the clerk tells the agent it hasn't won anything, then they get suspicious. But mistakes happen. If the clerk gives the ticket back, then it's probably not a crime. But if the clerk takes the ticket, then they're clearly trying to keep the money for themselves. That's not enough for a conviction, though. The lottery agent will leave the store and notify the lottery that the ticket has been taken. The lottery knows the number on the ticket, and they set up an alert so they're notified when someone tries to claim the cash from the ticket with the same unique number. They notify the police and will investigate the clerk that took the ticket and the person that tried to claim the winnings from the ticket if the clerk didn't do it themselves. That's how Sylvia was caught. She had no idea that the customer she was talking to one day was an undercover agent, or that she'd been deliberately handed a winning ticket, which of course she took for herself. Her husband was arrested as soon as he tried to claim the cash from the winning ticket. Oops. In every lottery crime we've mentioned so far, the clerk has told the ticket holder that their ticket didn't win anything. But don't be fooled. Sometimes they'll tell you that you're a winner. How can they steal your money then? Well, Andy Ascar tried this trick on a customer who brought in a ticket. He told the customer that his ticket had won $5,000. He even charged the winner $1,000 as a store fee, handing over $4,000. But the ticket was actually worth an incredible $5 million. Luckily, he was caught when officials got suspicious, because he waited as long as he was allowed to cash in the ticket. That's not the only time that happened either. Another clerk named Edward Brown was caught after filling out a lottery claim form incorrectly. He told his customer he'd won $100 when the ticket was actually worth $1,000. So you can't trust a clerk who gives you money. Our advice to help you avoid becoming a victim of a lottery clerk like Daniel and his friends did is to make sure the clerk gives your ticket back when you get it checked. And watch closely. Some clerks will give back some of your tickets while holding on to a winner, like Jun-Chul did to Daniel. And some will even switch your ticket for a different one, which happened to a war veteran in London. And also, it's much harder to steal a ticket if you've signed it. So always sign your ticket the minute you buy and watch carefully when you get the ticket checked. Obviously, not all clerks are trying to steal your money, but there's no way to tell if you're talking to a thief. Most of the people who were the rightful owners of tickets stolen by these clerks never got their winnings, including the London veteran who should have been given $8 million. But what about Daniel and his group of friends? Did they ever get their money back? Just because the Chung family were caught, that doesn't mean he got the money. Well, we have some good news. The Ontario Lottery and Gambling Corporation was obviously in a bit of trouble because of how many times this had happened in Ontario over the years. They needed to do something to prove that lottery winners do get the money they won. So, as part of trying to make it up to people who lost out to fraud, they put measures in place to make sure the rightful winners were paid. In this case, the Chung's assets in Canada were seized. That included the luxury cars and mansions they'd bought with Daniel's money. But even after they'd taken and resold all their assets, the lottery had only recovered $8 million of Daniel's winnings. For the rest of it, they decided to make Jun-Chul and Kathleen pay. Literally, each of them were fined $4.6 million to make up the rest of the money that rightly belonged to Daniel. Some of you will have noticed that the money they gathered adds up to more than Daniel actually won. That's because the lottery decided he needed to be paid back all his winnings plus interest from the years he didn't have access to it. So in the end, Daniel received $14.3 million. It's good to know that even though they didn't spend as much time in prison as they probably should have, they did have to face justice somehow. And, in a way, that punishment really does fit the crime. So what did Daniel do with the money? Well, he proved to everyone that there's never a good reason to be greedy. As he promised, he split the winnings equally with his 5 friends who he played the lottery with. Legally, Daniel would have been allowed to take the money for himself. He bought the winning ticket with his own money this time, as the friends always did, but he wasn't like the Chung family. He'd made an agreement with his friends, and he stuck to it. The entire group couldn't believe their luck, and they used their money to pay for important things, like education for their kids. Isn't it nice when a story has a happy ending? They don't always. Interested in hearing about one of the worst crimes ever committed against lottery winners? Then this story about the lottery lawyer who was taking money from winners to fund his shady crime syndicate is essential viewing. The story sounds like something out of a movie. It's guaranteed to blow your mind.